morning. My name is Nagier Chambers. It's an honor to talk to you today, Chris Jericho, about your new film, which I'm very excited to talk about the Death Tour, which is making its world premiere tonight at Slam Dance Film Festival. How you doing today?
I'm doing awesome, man. I'm just looking out at the snowy mountains here in Park City, Utah, and getting ready, like you said, for the premiere of Death Tour.
Absolutely. Before we get started, I just want to give you a second on the platform to further with your tribute yesterday to Nancy Benoit. I thought it was really beautiful. So I just wanted to open it up. If there's anything else you wanted to mention about Nancy, who has earned the PWI Lifetime Achievement Award.
I just think that sometimes, lots of times, people forget about how great she was at what she did, playing a character, and the presence she had in pro wrestling as a pioneer. As a performer that was very special. So I thought it was really cool that Pro Wrestling Illustrated gave her the Lifetime Achievement Award, and hopefully people will go back and kind of watch her career and not just focus on the last few days of her life, but focus on all the positive and amazing things she did within the pro wrestling world.
Yeah, yeah. I feel like and this kind of goes into one of my first questions is like you literally have done everything. And I'm always so interested when I see your name attached to any type of film or television because I think there's just a level of authenticity with the stories that come behind it with your name with it. So hearing about your small tribute to Nancy just instantly made me want to go dig and dive more into it. And I probably would expect you're going to get ready to get something out about her very soon because that's just the man you are. But with that being said, I have to ask you when it comes down to these stories, right? And obviously your work with the Dark Side of the Ring, you have done literally so much in your career, and not just wrestling, but obviously with music and obviously now with television and film. What draws you to these stories? What gets you to that point where you say like I need to be involved, I need to get this story out, this is dear to me, whatever it may be.
Well, I've done this is actually the second documentary that I've produced with two more in the chamber. And it's one of those things where it's an interesting story to me. And I'm a big fan of documentaries because to me, it doesn't matter what the subject of the documentary is, it's either a
Yeah,
good story or it's not. And I think when you're talking about the death tour, when I approach a project, I don't make it like this is not made for wrestling fans per se. You don't have to like pro wrestling to understand and appreciate the story of the death tour, both from the side of the people who are doing these tours, because it's very grueling, it's very hard, it's mentally taxing, it's physically taxing.
yeah,
And when you do this tour, it kind of like makes you think, do I have what it takes to be in
yeah,
this business? Conversely, for the communities where these tours come to, these indigenous communities in the northern wilds of Manitoba, nothing comes to these towns. So when wrestling comes, it gives these people a chance to have a night out where they can be inspired and where their dreams could possibly come true. So it really is an interesting story that unfolded as we made it,
mm,
for the people in the ring and the people outside of the ring. So that's what drew me to this, knowing like I've done these tours before, as have many world champions. Some of the biggest names in pro wrestling
yeah,
started doing the death tour. Chris Jericho, Kenny Omega, Adam Copeland, Christian Cage, Dr. Luther, Don Callis, Rhino, Scott Norton. I mean, it goes on and on and on. And there's also dozens of names that you've never heard of before and you'll never hear of again that do these tours. Maybe
yeah.
those were the ones that decided this wasn't for them. So I just knew there was a story to be told here. And the thing I love about doing a documentary like this, where it unfolds as you're filming it, you don't know what you're going to get. It's not
Yeah.
like doing a documentary on Elvis Presley when his life is there and there's a beginning, middle, and end. We don't know what's happening on this tour. And to see, what did we get today? How did it go? What interesting things happen?
Yeah.
That's to me the challenge of making a documentary like this. And it's very exciting. It's very rewarding and also very, very gratifying that when the movie was made, we got accepted to the Slam Dance Festival here in Park City, Utah, out of thousands of submissions. So we know we've done something right.
Yeah, and then as a film critic before wrestling fan, I absolutely know I'm going to be seeing this down some other film festivals. I expect this to be hitting the film festival circuit pretty hard. This is definitely must watch. I felt, as you said, as a wrestling fan, sure, but just as a person, I felt very elevated, encouraged, and just the awareness of something I didn't have much information about continues wants you to do, as documented should, continues wants you to dig deep more, want to know more about these people's lives, want to know more about the folks that's done these trips and this journey. So it's fantastic from beginning to the end. A couple of other little small questions before we actually get into some other things with it is that it is called the Death Tour. I have heard this be labeled as the Canadian Death Tour and the Northern Hell Tour. Which by the record is you setting the record straight. What is officially the name of the tour? Or what did
I,
you initially call it, shall I say?
I think the Death Tour is kind of what it's called now. I do remember the Hell Tour being a name for it as well. Obviously nobody's dying
Yeah.
on these tours, but the reason once again is because you get into a van in Winnipeg and you start driving north, and how you get to these reservations is over frozen lakes. That's like the only way to get there. There's no roads to get to these places. And sometimes the lakes aren't as frozen as you want them to be. There's cracking, there's like
Mhm.
issues like that. You get to the town, you're in the high school gymnasium, you've set up the ring, do the show, take down the ring, find the area of the gym that you're sleeping on, which is a floor. You roll out your sleeping bag that you bring with you. If you want something to eat, you have to go to the store where a jar of peanut butter costs $40, and that's no exaggeration. You see it in the movie. The case of water is like
Yeah,
120,
150. Yes.
150, and that's real. Like, it's not exaggeration. So you're like, what am I even doing here? Like, why
Yeah.
am I here? And then when it's done, like I said, you can decide for yourself why you're there. It's either
Yeah.
because you really want to do this and you want more, or maybe it's not as glamorous of a life as you expected it to be. So maybe you go into something else. So once again, there's a lot of trials and tribulations to this. And also, too, like I said, you see this in the movie when the show happens and these people who have very minimal experience are treated like rock stars, like
Yeah.
gods, like main
Yeah.
event. This is their WrestleMania for these people that are there. And I think that's very important to see as well, that once again, when you do the tour in the ring, you can get everything you always wanted out of the business. When you're watching, you can see everything you always wanted to see. Like, this is a big night. This is the biggest show in town,
Yeah.
in a community where nothing ever comes to town. So it's inspirational for the kids watching and for the people watching too. So we got to see kind of both sides of the coin there, with what we were doing on the Death Tour.
Yeah, I was gonna kind of jump into that towards the end of the interview here, but for you, just really thinking back about your career, your legacy, and seeing what's happening right here in your backyard, what sort of those emotions? And for me, I just want to say, as a viewer, when you look at these kids, I think like this makes it all worth it. But for you, when you think about just you doing the tour, the legacy you've created on the tour, and the folks that's come behind you that's looking up to you, but also sort of passing your gifts back, that's keeping this territory, shall I say, alive, and these kids entertained, and so much joy in their heart, as you say. Like, what's your emotion knowing that like you're part of this legacy, that goes all the way back to this younger generation right now?
Well, it's one of the reasons why I wanted to help produce this movie. I think it shows, you know, um, a part of the business that people don't realize. I
Yeah.
think a lot of people think, oh, pro wrestling, you're on TV in front of millions of people and they're making millions of dollars and it just happens overnight. It doesn't. Sometimes it takes years and years and years.
Yeah.
And doing tours like the Death Tours, how people, cut their teeth. Um, and also too, there's no other tour like this. There's not like there's a death tour or a hell tour in the States, and there's one in Mexico and there's one in Japan. It's only in Canada. It's
Yeah.
only in Manitoba. And when Tony Candelo decides he doesn't want to do these tours anymore, it's a part of the business that will never happen again. It's like
Mm.
it's like the Rolling Stones. Like, when Rolling Stones are done, you'll never have another band with the experiences and the longevity they've had. And it's the same with the Death Tour. 50 years of doing this, and Tony still loves doing it. You see it in the
Yeah.
movie.
Yeah.
You see it when they're driving to the town and there's a semi truck blocking the dirt road that they're driving on. And he has to get out and just hang out for 8 hours. This happens every single year, and
Yeah.
Tony still wants to do it. And so if you are an independent wrestler in Canada or in the States and you can get to northern Manitoba, go do this, because when it's over, you will never see an experience and a tour like this in pro wrestling ever again.
Yeah, I swear I was going to ask you my next question. Was there anything you would compare this journey to? And I instantly thought it's got to be something comparable to like Tijuana. Like we all know how dangerous Tijuana could be, but if
Yeah.
you said this is it, then this is it.
I mean, once again, it's not TJ with the dangers that you experience there, but it's the dangers of literally,
Mother
traversing
Nature.
through frozen tundra to get to a show that might not even happen. Once again, I mean, if there's a death on the reservation, which happens quite often because there's a lot
Right.
of addictions and a lot of suicides, you could drive 16 hours and get to the town like, no show today, guys. The reservation's shut down. And then you're like,
Yeah.
all right, then let's just drive 15 hours that way. So once again, it's one of those things where there'll never be anything like this again in wrestling or any other genre. And that's why I
Mhm.
was really happy we were able to capture it on film when we did on the
Yeah.
Death Tour documentary.
Yeah. Thank you again for your work for this. And I guess it's safe to say that Tony Condello is the name that should be attached to the Death Tour, who has labeled this as the Death Tour.
I don't know if Tony ever calls it that. He's the promoter, you know what I
Yeah.
mean? And uh he would I'm not sure if he
Somebody
actually
got to be
calls it that.
billed for it.
I have to ask them. But yeah, he is the architect behind this. Tony Condello is a very famous, legendary wrestling promoter in Canada. And everybody who's ever wrestled from my generation and probably all generations up to, the younger guys now in Canada have worked for him. So
Yeah.
it's one of those guys, like everybody used to be able to do a Stu Hart imitation. Everyone could do a Tony Condello imitation. And he's one of the last of the old school promoters.
Yeah.
And when he's gone, once again, part of that business will die forever. Now
Yeah.
wrestling is so much based around television and television revenue
Yeah.
and making money from that. This goes back to the old school when you're making $30 a show and getting 30 cents a kilometer for your gas money. You know what I mean? Oh, I just traveled 1,000 miles to get here. Well, here's your $300 for gas. Like that doesn't happen anymore, man. You know
Yeah.
what I mean? So Tony's one of the last of the OG wrestling promoters for sure.
That explains why when he was given his flowers in the spotlight at in AEW, why he just kind of like he wasn't comfortable there. He's kind of probably
Yeah, it's like,
overstimulated by everything.
they said my name. I couldn't even hear them. What is going on here? That's him.
Hey, so Jericho, listen, you've been literally have been called so many names, and you've also has self-proclaimed many names as well. Definitely multi hyphenate. And one thing I have not heard been attached to you, which should be, is a wrestling historian. I mean, you know these stories both currently in the business, and you know these stories historically, and you've been willing to share them all. And I think that's a beautiful thing, knowing how some folks like to keep things close to them because I guess that makes them feel, I don't know, special, empowered, or whatever it may be. But that's sort of been your journey outside of the ring, is always storytelling, getting the stories out. And again, as I mentioned earlier, when your name's attached to something, there's just a level of authenticity with these stories. So while we did talk a little bit about why you wanted to get this story out, you said you had two more in the chambers here. What might you be able to say about that? But also, again, what is sort of just that thrill in wanting to ensure that these stories get told?
Well, I've always been a fan of documentaries, of documentary filmmaking. So to me, like when I see a kernel of a story, that makes me want to get involved,
Mhm.
And the first documentary, I'm too old for this shit, if we can say that,
Yes, you can.
was about a rock and roll band
Yeah.
that disbanded 30 years ago but just found out they had a huge fan base in Germany. And I thought that's so interesting. Like their dreams were done when they were teenagers, and now 30 years later, there's a whole fan base for them that's listening to their music. And I thought this is either real and it's going to be amazing, or
Yeah.
it's going to be a complete, breakdown. It ended up being amazing, and it's a
Yeah.
great film that we did. Same with the Death Tour. Once again, and that's what happened with I'm Too Old for This. Was we're filming as we go. We don't know what we're gonna get. That's interesting to me. Same thing with Death Tour. Same thing. I just was in Vietnam for pro wrestling in Vietnam. Why pro wrestling in Vietnam? When you say the
Right.
name Vietnam, you're thinking Full Metal Jacket and Platoon and the war. That was 60 years ago. What's going on in Vietnam now that pro wrestling is the cultural bridge
Yeah.
between the West and the East? That's very
Mm.
interesting to me. So
Yes.
anything like that I see, and now I have the way to make these films. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? I have the wherewithal to do it
Yeah.
and a great team to do it behind me. So now whenever I hear any stories, like
You're
I still
ready.
think there's a Black Friday documentary that I want to make.
Okay.
There's another documentary on Luther, who was a career journeyman pro wrestler who signed his first national deal at the age of 50. That's interesting to me. You
And
30 years
killing it
you're in the
right now.
job. You know what I mean? So I like those elements because once again, I want to make documentaries that appeal to anybody. They're
Yeah.
not just for wrestling fans or rock and roll fans or Black Friday fans or whatever. The story has to be universal, that you could be a butcher, baker, candlestick maker and still be interested in it. So that's kind of where I approach it from. Like, this is a really cool story that I think everybody would be interested in. Let's make a movie.
Thinking outside the box,
That's
man.
it,
This is
man.
why your career is the way it is. And this is why, yeah, you're going to have a long, extended, healthy career also in storytelling and filmmaking. I'm glad to hear it. So, in the documentary here, Kenny Omega did share a story about a van falling through the ice. He's talking about the paranoia of the ice cracking. And I believe he was talking about Rhino's van, because I did a little research and I believe it was Rhino's van that had fell through the ice. And I think that's what Kenny was talking about. But the internet says, Wikipedia to be exact, said that you had done 2 tours, whether that's true or not. But you didn't mention about your take on the tour, your story from the tour. Did you have anything interesting that you
Well,
wanted to share
my
about
my
your time?
I have like another side of the coin where I was very lucky that I went to Mexico very early in my career and didn't have to do the death tours every year because I was
Hmm.
busy. I did do a death tour in the summer, which is a whole different vibe. You're like, oh well, it's not as deathy. It's just as bad because you're not traveling over the ice of the lakes. You're traveling on the dirt roads around the lake, so it's even longer. And dirt roads, man, dude, driving 70, 80 miles an hour on dirt roads, it's not easy. So I had that element. Maybe that'll be the sequel,
Okay.
summer death tour. But like I said, it's been something that's been in my vernacular since I started, because if I wasn't doing them, all my friends were, and I mentioned the names earlier, and you would hear every year like what happened this year and what went down and who was on the tour and who did good, who did bad. So wrestling's a pretty small business, so for us, we would always be talking about what happened and hearing all the stories. And originally, the documentary that I wanted to make for the death tour was more about those experiences and those stories and having way more talking heads involved.
Hmm.
As we started getting into it, we realized that the brilliance of this story we're telling was about not just the wrestlers and not just what happened in the past, but what was happening now, and the
Yeah.
people that were watching it. Like I said, in the communities that were getting inspiration from this and were thriving from these tours coming to their area, and that became much more of the story than just recounting kind of some of these crazy moments that happened for all the guys that were involved in these tours.
Yeah, very humanizing is the
Yeah.
word that I put together for my review. Is that and I always like to caution, especially with wrestling fans. You see wrestler in it, you think it's a wrestling story, but no, this is about humans, and especially at the end, if there's any bigger indication that this is about society and humanity, is the focus on suicide and the indigenous people, who's affected by the colonization. You mentioned it pretty earlier in our talk today. when you hear about and knowing about these things happening in your backyard here with suicide and still how indigenous people and their oppression and them still also wanting to get their stories told, what extra bit of motivation did it get for you in terms of wanting to get the story out and also being a part of it and the change that this will make?
Well, I mean, once again, I just think that when we do something like this, it's a world that a lot of people haven't seen, and and a lot of people, if you're not from Canada, or even if you are, don't know just how remote some of these areas are,
Yeah,
and just how depressing a lot of the areas are. So to me, like, after wrestling in these places many times, whether it's the summer or the winter, you when you come to town, you are really, like I said, critically acclaimed, and a big star to these people in the community, because it's their night to shine as well. And I think that when you show people that don't really know or think about this, it opens up a whole new level of awareness of, like, wow, like, there's people everywhere, and everybody just wants to have a good time, and everybody just wants to be entertained. And I think
yeah,
this tour allows that to happen, and we're getting a chance to see that, kind of pulling back the curtain of what life is like on these remote reservations for these communities.
yeah, yeah. And for the wrestlers involved, it gives them an escape for some of the things that they're personally dealing with. We have one of the ladies who lost her son, which is just a touching story. And I also love that she mentioned that she felt like her son's spirit through the fans. I mean, you just can't get no better than that. Somebody who's lost their child and continue to be a part of the death tour, but also finding a moment of peace by seeing the little kids' faces that are outside the ring, whether they're throwing soda cans or not, but ultimately engage with it.
Yeah, yeah.
Anyway, before we wrap up here today, anything else you want to mention about the film or any of your upcoming projects that we could keep an eye out for?
No, man, just we're excited to be here today. In Slam Dance, it's a huge film festival, and out of
Yeah,
thousands of films that were submitted, the Death Tour was selected. So we're very honored by that, and I'm excited for the world to get a chance to check it out.
absolutely. Folks,
Thanks, man.
the absolutely. Listen, folks, the Death Tour will be making this world premiere tonight at Slam Dance, but keep your eyes out for it. I already see that it will be popping up in March at Cannes. So that only tells me that it's about to be
Nice.
any and everywhere. Absolutely. Cannes, one of the biggest, if not the biggest film festival in the entire world. So I know for a fact everybody will be getting a chance to check this out. So keep your eyes glued for it. Chris Jericho, thank you so much for your time today.
Thanks, brother. Take care, man.
Absolutely. Yep. Take care.